never knew that there was a career available where like browsing the dark parts of Tumblr as a teen like was a job qualification, and yet here I am all these years later.
I'm John Starr, advisor at Thorn.
I'm Paylez Halai, senior manager of partnerships at Thorn.
And this is Safe Space.
Today, I'm so happy to welcome Ryn Linthicum to the podcast for what I'm sure will be an interesting conversation. Especially at a time when generative AI is reshaping our world, Ryn brings a unique combination of deep background in research and academia, paired with years of experience working in trust and safety at TikTok and now Anthropic. Ryn, welcome to Safe Space. So excited to see you again. How are you?
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here and chatting with you today.
Yeah, likewise. It was great to see you this summer, just recently at TrustCon. I got to listen to a couple of the panels that you were on. How was that?
TrustCon is always one of the highlights of my year, honestly, just seeing so many friends, colleagues in the same space and learning so much from different folks in the industry. It was really a wonderful experience. I was just sad that I didn't get more hallway track time with folks.
I know. It's like you go into it with so many ambitions, right? You want to connect with so many folks. You end up getting dragged into different directions. But yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. It's such a highlight for us in our field, and it's very energizing to come away from. Before we get started, we'd really love to hear kind of what's going on in your world today, just to set the stage. I'm sure your days aren't very typical at Anthropic, but give us a high level of what your typical day looks like nowadays.
I mean, I think the fun thing about doing policy work in our safeguards team, which is what we call trust and safety and a bundle of other work at Anthropic, the fun thing is that my day to day is always different. There's always a new challenge popping up in the world of generative AI. And so it really doesn't stay consistent. I think at the moment, some of the projects that I've been working on include things like building out better evaluation sets for different types of behaviors that we want to make sure that we know how the model is responding to, or build additional safeguards and layers of safety on top of. We're also working with external experts to be able to understand a little bit more about what are the external perspectives on how our model is performing in different settings. And then part of my day-to-day is honestly just keeping up with the technology. I think that things are changing and moving so quickly. So it's really fun to have the time to be able to really explore, what is the next step in AI? What is the frontier? What are new things that are coming up? So yeah, that's kind of the day-to-day. And then also all the boring things, it's still a job. So we still do meetings. We still do, snack breaks in the canteen. That's less boring, but kind of the day-to-day of normal TNS work too.
Yeah, I think it's such a double-edged sword, right? You want work that's interesting, but you also sometimes, I'm sure, crave a little bit of consistency. So I'm glad that it's working for you and you're getting what you need out of it today. I'm really curious to step back as well. So something that we like to do when we start these conversations is really dig into what did this person want to be when they were a kid, right? One thing we've learned is in trust and safety, almost everyone has such an eclectic background. So can you share with us what did young Ryn want to be as an adult?
So I was very dedicated to the astronaut track, far beyond the 7 or 8-year-old when most kids give up this dream. I was thinking about it through college. I was saving up all of my money to go to space camp each summer. So I was very on track to that. And then a few things happened. I realized, one, the space program in the US kind of fell apart a little bit. And two is I just realized that my interests were kind of in other directions. And so I pivoted in college to focus more on psychology and have that background. But I realized kind of in retrospect, I think I was preparing for a career in trust and safety before I even knew that that was an option, because I never knew that there was a career available where browsing the dark parts of Tumblr as a teen was a job qualification. And yet here I am all these years later.
I love that. Believe it or not, I gave the same answer when John asked me what I wanted to do when I was a kid, when I grew up. I said astronaut. And then funnily enough, I also pivoted into criminology and psychology at college. So it's a funny commonality we share. And again, going back to this eclectic background that we have in trust and safety. I think it just speaks volumes to that as well. I want to go a little bit deeper now into the early part of your career rather than what your ambitions as a child. You spent a lot of time devoted to research early in your career. So from Reed College to Harvard to UNC and Florida State, which I think John attended as well. How did that time in academia shape your approach now in trust and safety?
I think it really gave me an appreciation for taking a data-driven approach to writing policy and really an understanding of just how deep subject matter expertise can go. What I learned throughout all of my research that I was doing and all of my degrees is that sometimes the things that seem like the obvious answer, I think particularly in spaces when humans are interacting, can actually have really unforeseen negative consequences. And vice versa. Sometimes there's things that you're like, I really don't think that this is going to work. But when you experiment with it, you realize, hey, this is actually the right path forward. And so I think having that time, in the lab, really working on research gave me a much keener understanding of why we need to measure and test and be able to really back up the assumptions that we're making with data. And when we're not able to have those robust research studies, being really clear about the limits of why we're making a certain decision and what would be needed to change that decision in the future.
Ryn, first of all, it's wonderful to see you. Welcome to the pod. It's great to be in the presence of two wannabe astronauts. We're all glad that you chose the path that you have. Ryn, you touched on this kind of part of your journey in really kind of uncovering this sort of like deeper understanding of human behavior, which is obviously a very complex matter and maybe for another podcast. That said, the role of research has really grown in trust and safety. Can you maybe shed some light on, from your perspective, the importance of research and just why it is really critical that we continue to spend a lot of time looking very deeply at a lot of the issues in and around trust and safety?
I'm so glad that more attention is being paid to research within the field. I think that when you're dealing with a lot of the issues that trust and safety faces, so things like identity, mental health, differences among different, age groups, cultures, all sorts of the topics of kind of the traditional trust and safety field, there's a lot of potential for personal bias and kind of anecdata to sneak in and color how you're looking at it. And I think that's really valuable. Like, you want to have the voices of lived experience. You want to have the voices of people who are the most impacted by this, who are entering the conversation. But it's also really important to take a step back and consider, does this individual experience actually generalize out to the entire population of people that are interacting with your product? And I think that doing that research and doing that experimentation in a more robust manner can really help us make sure that we're designing not just for the individual, but also for society as a whole. It's a great way of bringing more perspectives into the conversation and more perspectives and like not feeling as alone too in terms of decision making, right? I think that like as a policy person, we get asked all of these really difficult questions that we're struggling with on a day-to-day basis. And for me, at least, having that research community and having those papers to point to makes it less feel like it's all on my shoulders and more feel like there's an entire community of people who are interested in this, who are chiming in and who are helping to advise, where should we go with this?
One point that you touched on was having this sort of like deep, complex understanding to kind of anchor in through through research and through kind of a deeper understanding of things. I think there is then the application of that insight and knowledge at the size, speed, and scale of the internet. What drove you to take the pivot from a research lens to, okay, how do I apply that? How did you kind of make that change?
Yeah, I think I've always been really interested in how do things scale. So I was really interested in, okay, what's the difference between, I was a trainee therapist for a few years. Like, what's the difference between me treating this person who's right in front of me versus how we think about dynamics interacting, as a whole, in small groups and large groups at a societal level, just because some things transfer and some things seem to really not jump across the gap. And so I was really interested in how network dynamics work and kind of what things break at scale. I think for me, part of the origin story is also that, like, I, grew up at a time where I was exploring all of these different social networks and all of these different internet sites. It was interesting being in the research world because I think that I would see some of the decisions that were made or some of the headlines that came out and be like, oh, why can't they just do better? Like, what are they doing here? And then transitioning into the inner world of working on these products was the biggest exercise in humility and eating crow that I think I have ever had, because suddenly I realized just how hard some of these questions are. It's really easy to say something like, oh, you should not show content that is going to exacerbate someone's mental health issues. But when you get into the fact that the same sentence or the same advice can help one person and harm another, and like do nothing to a third person, it gets really complicated to get into the nitty-gritty of where should we move forward really quickly. And so for me, I think the opportunity to really wrestle with the details of how we should approach this as a whole was really something that I was excited to dive in on and to learn more about, like, why is this a genuine challenge versus just being one of the people that was kind of naively screaming from the outside.
I love that. How do we scale that journey that you went through to a global perspective? So, what I mean by that is a lot of the concepts on the internet at the speed of trust and safety, there is what can appear to be an obvious solution. Oh, why don't we just do X? Or clearly, y'all, it's Z. And then you mentioned your experience of, oh, it may depend, or it may be more complex. How do we scale that level of understanding to more and more people?
That's a great question. I have found a lot of success with sitting down with folks and, as much as possible, giving them examples that are very specific or giving them the experience of, being a policy writer, being a content moderator, and actually having them grapple with like a specific topic, just because I think that that's the quickest way to kind of see where some of the gaps may be. That you have. And it's also just a great learning experience in terms of, we get feedback from external partners on what what some of the gaps are that they're seeing, what are some of the complications that we're seeing, and it creates a really good conversation, I think, about why this specific space can be really challenging to work in. So yeah, I think that just as much as you can encourage people to take an active role or to do a simulation of this, it's a really good way for folks to understand why it's hard. At TrustCon, there was I think, a content moderation game that they had as a
Mhm.
demo, and wow, I was so bad at it. Like, but it was a really great illuminative experience, I think, for folks who aren't in the space as to why it's complicated to write policy and apply it well.
This is just part of the conversation with Ryn Linthicum. You can catch highlights and the full Safe Space episode right here.